I wanted to get into something that I failed to add when I was doing genres, and that is tone. Tone is technically not genre, but it's so influential that it's practically impossible to tell the two apart. The one thing about tone is that tone can shift much more easily than genre can. You can switch between different tones or different combinations of tones um, from story to story, or even within a story, you can switch around. It can become too much, and it can become jarring, but you can switch far more between tones than you can between, for example, worlds or um, plot types. You can switch between plot types as well, a mystery one time and action next time, but there is more leeway with tone. It's far more flexible. Sometimes so much that it's hard to tell what kind of tone a story is using. Now, the tone it has a slight relation to theme, but it's more nebulous. Um, most tones can be put on a slider from going from very, very dark, grim, and I don't know if pessimistic is a powerful enough term, but all the way to silly slapstick in the other end, and you have gritty, and you have realistic, and you have lighthearted along the way. Um, but sometimes it blends together with others. For example, if you have a very serious tone, a realistic but serious tone, it can glide into how the world is set up. For example, you'd expect a serious tone to indicate a world that works on at least believable laws of nature. Whereas if you have silly, you can have people getting badly hurt and still just walk it off. Or you can have things acting in ways they don't usually act. That's Nico. He's complaining that he's not getting more food all the time. But tones, as I said, can shift and can be mixed. And it's sometimes hard to tell even what kind of tone there is. Lighthearted is what you'd probably say that the Marvel universe, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, is at this point and has to a great extent been for a very long time. But still, it slips into silly quite often. It slips into serious less often, but also fairly often. And sometimes it even gets a bit dark. So the tone kind of slides around between different pure tones. And that's not because it's a special blend of tone. It's not like a world that's a blend of two genres, like magical cyberpunk or something. It's not that clear a blend. It's just because the tone shifts around, and wherever the tone lies the most is usually where you'd pinpoint the tone of a story to be. But technically, you can have something that goes all the way from being very grim and dark and slipping all the way to silly and back again, but it will seem jarring. There's there isn't an actual limit to how far you can take tone, but everyone has their own limit to how believable shifts in tone will be. Some will be perfectly all right with having a dark and broody tone and then having slapstick elements come in and having brief moments of levity or silliness or just downright heartful seriousness, while others will expect their tones to be more pure. If they go for lighthearted, they don't want anything serious and they don't want anything slapstick to go in to the story. They want the lighthearted story. If they are very grim and dark and hopeless, they don't want positivity to sneak in. They want their stuff pure. And that makes tone a bit of a problem because whereas you can group people around genres, it's very hard to group people around tones. Everyone will say, "Oh, I like this tone, I like this tone," but the fact is that it slides around a lot. And keeping the tone of a story pure is it's not easy. It's not easy because writers do the same thing. They also slip between tones. Sometimes it's just better to accept what kind of tones you work in and hope that you're gonna find an audience or that your audience you already have will enjoy that. But being aware of tone gives an advantage when writing because you will not have the same jarring mix where everything is suddenly goes from serious to slapstick for just a brief moment and then back again. That is a very common problem for inexperienced writers to not be able to keep the tone straight. If you have to shift between tones, you have to be aware that you're shifting between tones and you have to be aware how it slips between tones. Usually, if it's sticking to one tone and just having another tone briefly enter, it's best to keep it small. I keep thinking of the moment in Doctor Strange, the movie from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where everything is kind of serious and then suddenly his magical cloak wipes a tear from his eye and he complains about it as a joke. It's something called bathos. It's kind of a counterweight to pathos. Pathos being the very dramatic, intense moments, and bathos being those moments being undermined by a brief stint of humor. So the tone pretty much scales along that with a few variants that don't really seem to fit on a straight line, but most of them go from being very, very dark to being very, very lighthearted or even silly. And knowing what tone you want to work in, or what tone you are working in, whether you want to or not, will usually enhance your writing.